Life had learned to respond. It could turn, it could seek, it could avoid. It could change its behavior when the world changed around it. That was a profound threshold. But response is not yet sensation. To react is one thing, to sense is another. A living system may act differently under different conditions. But at some point, difference outside begins to become something more than a trigger for action. It begins to create a richer pattern within. The world is no longer only changing behavior, it is beginning to be registered inwardly. That is where sensation begins.
In the previous stage, we saw how life begins to respond to the world around it. That meant the outside world could now matter to the inner process of life. Light, chemistry, touch, movement, these could shape behavior. That was a major threshold. But sensation is deeper than response. Because sensation is not only action, it is inward registration. It is the beginning of inner contact with the world. This does not yet mean thought, not yet reflection, not yet self-awareness, not yet mind in its later richness. But it does mean that life is moving closer to something profoundly new. It means that the world is beginning to be felt in the earliest possible way.
At first, a living system may simply change behavior. A cue appears. The organism turns. A condition worsens. It closes. A resource appears. It moves closer. But over time, these responses become more coordinated. The outside world does not only produce movement, it begins to produce organized inner changes. That difference matters deeply, because now the organism is not only doing something differently, it is beginning to register difference within itself. A change in light, a shift in chemistry, a touch, a vibration, a pressure. These no longer only cause activity. They begin to leave an inward trace. This is the first step towards sensation.
Response can remain simple for a long time. A change outside produces a useful change in behavior. That alone is already important. But sensation requires something more. It requires that information about the outside world be carried inward in a more organized way. Not yet language, not yet concept, not yet thought. But signal, pattern, coordination. A change outside creates a change inside that is not only immediate action, but a more structured internal event. This is one of the hidden foundations of mind. Because mind does not appear from nowhere, it grows from the deepening of inner responsiveness. Before there can be reflection, there must first be inner signal. Before there can be thought, there must first be inner contact. And sensation begins there. This is where the story becomes more intimate. The organism is no longer only meeting the world through outward adjustment. It is beginning to have an inward relation to it. A touch is no longer only a disturbance. A chemical difference is no longer only a trigger. A light change is no longer only an event. They begin to become forms of inner contact. This is still primitive, still early, still far from the richness of later sensing and feeling. But it is real, and it changes the future, because now the organism is not only preserving itself through useful action, it is beginning to build an inner side to its relation with the world. That is one of the great thresholds in the evolution of energy.
Sensation matters. Because it deepens the relationship between organism and world. Response allows life to act usefully. Sensation begins to allow life to register the world more intimately. This changes everything. Because once the world is registered inwardly, life is no longer only adjusting. It is beginning to form an inner dimension. Not yet a human inner life, not yet reflection, not yet emotion in the later sense, but an early inwardness. A primitive interior bridge between world and organism. This is the beginning of something extraordinary. Because once inwardness appears, the future of life changes. Now the path toward feeling, perception, awareness, and mind can truly begin to open.
Mind does not begin with language. It does not begin with abstract thought. It does not begin with memory in its later richness. It begins much earlier. It begins when life develops the first inwardly meaningful contact with the world. This is why sensation is one of the great thresholds in the evolution of energy. Because sensation is the early root from which feeling, perception, awareness, and later mind can grow. Without sensation, mind has no living foundation. So this episode is not yet about full mind. It is about the ground on which mind will one day stand. That ground is inward registration. That ground is inner contact. That ground is sensation. There is also a deeper philosophical meaning here. Before this stage, the universe builds matter, worlds, life, and response. But with sensation, something inward begins to deepen. The world is no longer only answered, it is beginning to be felt in a primitive way. Again, not human feeling, not emotion, not reflective awareness, but the earliest roots of inward contact. This is the beginning of the universe moving not only through structure and response, but toward experience. That is an extraordinary step, because until now, existence has been increasingly organized, increasingly alive, increasingly responsive. Now it begins in the smallest and earliest way to become inwardly sensitive. That is the road toward mind. Sensation is not yet full mind. But without sensation, mind cannot emerge. This is why episode 9 is so important in the EOE journey. It explains how life begins to build the bridge between useful response and inner world. The first sensations may be tiny, simple, fragmented, primitive. And yet,
they open the future. Because now response can deepen into feeling. Feeling can deepen into awareness. Awareness can deepen into mind. The road is still long, but it truly begins here. What was once only outer change has now become the beginning of inner contact. That changes the destiny of life. At earlier stages, the world remains something that existence passes through, or reacts to, or survives within. But with sensation, the world is no longer only outside. It begins to take form within the organism. Not yet as image, not yet as concept, not yet as memory in the later sense, but as primitive registration. This is a subtle but revolutionary step, because now the organism does not only encounter the world, it begins to carry a small inward trace of it. This is the beginning of an interior dimension. That interiority will one day become perception, then feeling, then awareness, then mind. But here, it is still only the first spark. Still early, still fragile, still incomplete. And yet, the future already lives within it. The beginning of sensation may not look dramatic. No grand event, no sudden intelligence, no immediate consciousness. Only small inward changes, tiny signals, primitive coordination, a subtle deepening of organism and world. And yet, this threshold is immense, because here the universe crosses from useful biological response into the earliest possibility of inner life. That does not mean the full richness of later experience exists already, but it does mean that the road toward it has truly begun. This is why the birth of sensation is one of the most intimate moments in the whole EOE journey, because here, existence begins to turn inward.
Episode 8 showed us how life begins to respond. Episode 9 shows us how response begins to become sensation. This is the next deep preparation. The organism no longer only acts, it begins to register. The world no longer only causes behavior, it begins to create inward contact. This is not yet awareness, but it is the road towards awareness. And that road matters enormously, because the later possibility of reflection, selfhood, mind, and human questioning depends on this early threshold. Without sensation, awareness cannot deepen. Without inward contact, mind has no path. So here, the universe is preparing the first real interior ground on which awareness can one day rise.
So the story moves forward again. From worlds came life. From life came response. And from response comes sensation. The universe has crossed another threshold. It has moved from living relationship to the first beginnings of inner contact. But sensation alone is not the end of the story. The next question is even more intimate. How does sensation deepen into awareness, reflection, and the kind of mind that can eventually ask questions about itself. That is where our journey goes next. This is Evolution of Energy.